What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and if you are a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, you are going to want to sit down for this one, because what we are about to break down today is absolutely massive. I am talking about a report that dropped from none other than Elliotte Friedman, the man, the myth, the legend of NHL insider reporting, and the details coming out of this story are sending shockwaves through the entire hockey world right now. So before we get into anything else, do me a favor, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, because we are covering this story in full and you do not want to miss a single second of what we're about to get into here. Now let's set the stage, because context is everything when we are talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs. This is a franchise that has not won a Stanley Cup since 1967. Let that number sit with you for a second. 59 years. And every single offseason, every single trade deadline, every single summer, Leafs Nation gets its hopes up and wonders. Is this the year? Is this the year it finally comes together? And for the better part of the last decade, this team has been built around a core that on paper looks absolutely elite. You've got the talent. You've got the market. You've got the fan base that is arguably the most passionate in the entire sport. But what they haven't had is the consistency, the playoff success, and frankly, the organizational clarity that turns a good team into a great one. And that's exactly where this Elliotte Friedman report hits differently. Because what Friedman is reporting goes beyond just a roster move. This isn't just, oh, the Leafs are looking at this player or there's some minor contract extension in the works. No. What Friedman is laying out points to a fundamental shift in how this organization is going to approach things heading into the next chapter. And when you look at what just happened to this franchise in the 2025-26 season, suddenly everything that Friedman is saying makes complete and total sense. Let's be real about how this past season went. The Toronto Maple Leafs missed the playoffs entirely. They did not make it. In an Eastern Conference that eventually saw the Carolina Hurricanes win the Stanley Cup, a dominant, battle-tested, defensively suffocating team that swept their way through the conference finals and beat the Vegas Golden Knights 4-2 in the Cup final, the Leafs were nowhere to be found when the puck dropped in April. They finished the season going out with a whimper, dropping games to Ottawa, getting shut out by Washington, getting blown out by Florida. And at the end of the regular season, this team had a losing record in its final stretch of games that was genuinely embarrassing for a franchise of this caliber. That is not just a bad stretch. That is a structural problem. That is a culture problem. And according to Elliotte Friedman, the people inside that organization know it, and they are preparing to do something significant about it. Now Friedman, and if you follow him on 32 Thoughts, you know that when he speaks, you listen, because this man does not throw things out there carelessly. Friedman is indicating that there is serious internal conversation happening around the identity of this team going forward. We are talking about questions that go right to the heart of how this roster is built, who the leader of this team is in the locker room, what the coaching staff looks like philosophically, and most importantly, whether this organization is ready to make the kind of bold, uncomfortable decisions that contending teams have to make. Because here's the thing, Carolina didn't win the Stanley Cup by playing it safe. They committed to a system, they committed to a culture they developed from within, and when they needed to add at the deadline, they added smartly. The Leafs have historically done the opposite. They've overpaid for veteran talent, they've been reactive instead of proactive, and the results have spoken for themselves. And what makes this Friedman update so fascinating, and honestly so surprising to a lot of people, is that the direction being discussed internally is not what most Leafs fans were expecting to hear. Because the narrative heading into this offseason was pretty predictable, right? Most people assumed the Leafs would tinker around the edges, maybe make a splash in free agency, bring in a veteran defenseman, and essentially run it back with the same core group while hoping for better results. That is the path of least resistance. That is the comfortable path. But according to what Friedman is reporting, that comfortable path is exactly what this organization is trying to walk away from. And that, my friends, is why this story is so significant. Because when you have a franchise of this size, with this kind of financial muscle and this kind of pressure from ownership and from the fan base, making a bold decision is genuinely difficult. The easiest thing in the world is to say our guys are good, we just need to stay healthy, we just need a bounce here or there in the playoffs. That's the easy answer. The hard answer, the honest answer, is that something more fundamental needs to change. And what Friedman is dropping hints about suggests that the people making decisions in Toronto are finally ready to have that honest conversation. Now let's talk about what specifically is on the table, because this is where it gets really interesting. When you look at the pieces the Leafs have to work with this offseason, there are meaningful decisions to be made at almost every level of the roster. Goaltending has been a conversation that never really goes away in Toronto. The defensive structure of this team has been criticized consistently by analysts who point out that you cannot win in the modern NHL without a blue line that can suppress shots and win battles in the corners, and the Leafs have too often been a team that tries to outscore their problems rather than outdefend them. That works in the regular season sometimes. It does not work against elite teams in the postseason, and the entire league saw that play out yet again this past year. But here is the wrinkle that Friedman is introducing into this conversation, and this is the part that nobody saw coming. The discussion is not just about adding players or subtracting players. According to what he's reporting, the philosophical conversation is about whether this team needs to completely redefine its identity from the top down. And that means looking at things like how this team is coached, how the practice habits are structured, how young players are being developed within the system, and critically, how the veteran core is being utilized and whether the current structure around them is actually serving their potential or limiting it. That is a massive, massive question for an organization to be asking about itself. And the fact that they are asking it, according to Friedman, is either a sign of real maturity and self-awareness, or a sign of desperation depending on who you ask. And here's my honest take on this, and I want to know what you guys think down in the comments because I could genuinely see this going either way. On one hand, a team that is willing to look itself in the mirror after a disappointing season and say we need to change who we are, not just what we have, that is actually a healthy thing. That is what winning organizations do. The Carolina Hurricanes did it years ago. They tore things down, they built a culture, and this past June they were raising the Stanley Cup. So change is not automatically a bad thing. In fact, for the Leafs, the definition of insanity at this point is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. But on the other hand, there is a real danger here too, and I think Leafs fans need to be clear-eyed about it. Because when organizations start talking about fundamental change and redefining identity, sometimes that is code for chaos. Sometimes that means good players get moved in deals that don't return enough value. Sometimes it means a coaching change that disrupts chemistry. Sometimes it means a prolonged rebuild that pushes a window that was already barely open even further into the future. And for a fan base that has been waiting since 1967, adding even one more year of mediocrity to the timeline is genuinely painful. So this has to be done right. This cannot be change for the sake of change. This has to be thoughtful, strategic, and built on a real vision. What Friedman is telling us is that the vision is being formed right now. The conversations are happening. The hard questions are being asked. And the decisions that come out of those conversations over the next several weeks and months are going to define the next era of Toronto Maple Leafs hockey. This is one of those moments where a franchise either turns the corner for real or doubles down on the same mistakes in a slightly different costume. And I'll tell you this much, the fact that Elliotte Friedman is the one bringing this to light means it is not a rumor. It is not speculation from some guy on a forum. This is sourced, this is credible, and there are people inside that organization talking because they want the message out there. Sometimes that is a trial balloon to gauge fan reaction. Sometimes it is a signal to players around the league that Toronto is serious about changing its culture. And sometimes it is just the truth, raw and unfiltered, about what is really happening behind closed doors at the Air Canada Centre. So Leafs Nation, buckle up. This offseason is going to be unlike anything we have seen in recent memory. The moves that get made,